Chapter 1. Sheriff Dugan Walton didn't mind leading the 5-kilometer foot races in the Chevy Impala the department had recently purchased. Today, however, his new deputy made it difficult to focus on the race route. Her name was Marla Easton. She was a 34-year-old widow with wavy, dark brown hair that reached the middle of her back. Her deep blue eyes occasionally short-circuited his mental wiring, making it challenging to put together a coherent sentence. But he tried not to waste time dwelling on it. Realistically, he had a better chance of seeing Elvis beam down from a UFO than romancing Marla Easton. Growing up together in a small Ohio town, they had known each other most of their lives. They were good friends, and now fellow officers serving the citizens of Dare County, North Carolina.
"You're not going to believe this,"
Marla said, her hand resting on the top of his seat, brushing his shoulder as she twisted her slim waist to peer out the back window.
"What's happening?"
Dugan glanced at the rearview mirror to check on the lead pack of runners, but quickly refocused in front of it, in anticipation of the turn onto Sir Walter Raleigh Avenue. They were approaching the 2-mile point, and Dugan knew he needed to be cognizant of the aid station workers handing out cups of water.
"Doc Hopkins just took over the lead." "Doc Hopkins? He's got to be 65 years old."
Dugan knew the retired doctor was fit, but no way should he be banging elbows with young studs in a 5K race.
"What's his 2-mile time?"
Marla checked her watch.
11:20. Does that sound right?
Impossible. He's on pace to break 18 minutes.
Maybe 17:30.
How could that be? Dugan, in his mid-30s, ran regularly to keep in shape for any physical challenge that confronted him in the line of duty. His best time for a 5K was in the low 19s. Marla gripped Dugan's shoulder.
"He's pulling away."
Dugan took a deep breath, trying to ignore the tingling that surged through him at her touch. He could see Hopkins clearly in the rearview mirror, his long gray hair bouncing with each stride, his legs tanned and muscular for an older man. He ran loosely, effortlessly. Manteo High's top-distance runner, Eric Morrison, struggled to hang on but faded with every stride.
"There's something wrong with this snapshot." "He's good, that's all."
"No, he's in his 60s. Got to be taking something."
"Come on, Dugan."
"Seriously, steroids, testosterone, amphetamine, something. I beat him in a race 2 years ago, ran 19:30. He's on something."
"You're just jealous."
Marla leaned against him to get a better view out of the rearview window.
"Wow, he's pulling away now."
Dugan drew in her familiar fragrance, a combination of vanilla and wildflowers. He fought the temptation to savor it. Don't go down that dead end. Rejection alley. A man that old shouldn't be experimenting with his body. Not good for the heart. Wouldn't be surprised if he keeled over at the finish line. The doctor should know better.
"Did you know that Dr. Hopkins was a medical researcher?"
No, what kind of research?
"I'm not sure, but he wasn't a regular doctor."
Marla turned around in her seat and faced the windshield. Mimi Roberts goes out with him occasionally. He belongs to our Buxton book club. I like him a lot, and she thinks he's a fascinating guy. Dugan glanced in the mirror again. With only about 500 yards to go, Hopkins showed no signs of letting up. Dugan passed a crowd of spectators in front of the Pizza Hut and then slowed to turn left onto Queen Elizabeth Avenue. Not far now, a few hundred yards. Dugan believed Marla would make a great deputy, but she had a lot to learn about people. In his 13 years of law enforcement on the Outer Banks, he'd seen it all. Rapes, robberies, murders, child molestations. Nothing surprised him anymore. When something out of the ordinary occurred, there was always a good explanation. Dugan peered up to see the skull and crossbones on the sign hanging from Poor Richard's sandwich shop, the symbol of death. A chill surged through him. Doc Hopkins was on something. Runners crossing ethical lines for fast times wasn't anything new, but was definitely more deadly with age. Dugan made the final turn onto Festival Park Road. Now it was a straight shot across the bridge onto the small island where the race would finish. The arc of the bridge made for the only hill on the course. Dugan kept glancing into the rearview mirror, anticipating Doc Hopkins' sudden collapse. To his surprise, the old guy kept up his stride and even smiled. Shouldn't he be in great pain at this point in the race? Must have popped painkillers. No one challenged him. His lead had stretched to 40 yards. Dugan pulled off to the side as they neared the path that led to the outdoor amphitheater, put the car in park, and turned off the engine. Marla threw open her door, bolted into the October sunshine, and pumping her fists in the air, cheered for Doc Hopkins. Yes! She hurried down the asphalt path to watch him finish in front of the stage. Dugan followed. Her exuberance irked him. Was he a bit jealous? If that doctor was taking his own designer drugs, it didn't make sense to cheer for him. Hopkins crossed the line at 17:35, 2 minutes faster than he'd run 2 years ago. That's got to be a world-class time for his age group. Hopkins walked steadily through the narrowing chute. Eric Morrison finished second in 17:50, stumbling, almost falling until a race volunteer helped stabilize him. Dugan then observed Hopkins as he exited the chute and leaned on his knees, catching his breath. Marla approached the doctor and placed her hand on his back.
Great race, Dr. Hopkins. Are you okay?
Fine, Marla.
He peered up at her and smiled.
I mean, Deputy Easton, just a little winded.
He straightened and placed his hand around her waist. They walked toward Dugan.
By the way, congratulations. Mimi told me you were the newest member of our county's fine law enforcement team.
Marla smiled that beautiful smile. Dugan didn't want her to notice how that smile enchanted him, so he turned to watch the other runners finish. Roger Stern, a member of the county's forensic investigation unit, crossed the line next, managing to break 19 minutes. Stern was a big-headed jackass. Dugan knew he would have to endure Stern's bragging about posting a 5K time faster than anyone else on the force this year. Somehow, Stern would throw in a mixed metaphor or two.
I'm sweating it like a bullet. Ran a hell of a time, though, like a rabbit in a windstorm.
Worse than his self-absorbed ramblings was the fact that he was a good-looking man. 6'2", light blonde hair, chiseled jaw, well-built. Women drooled over him. Dugan's Richie Cunningham looks didn't draw much attention from the ladies, although he did manage a date now and then. Dugan turned to face Marla and Doc Hopkins. It was warm for a mid-October morning, mid-60s. And sweat dripped from the doctor's face. But Dugan didn't notice any signs of extreme stress, no twitching or shaking or bloodshot eyes or impaired coordination. In fact, the doctor appeared quite healthy.
Nice race, Doc,
Dugan said.
Oh, thanks, Sheriff Alton. Beautiful day to run.
How do you feel?
Excellent. Never felt better.
Dugan noticed his face glowed, his skin very smooth for an old man.
You've improved over the last 2 years.
Hopkins nodded.
When I raced against you 2 years ago, I beat you. No way I could keep up today.
You never know. You might have pulled it off.
No, Doc, you were 2 minutes faster today than you were 2 years ago. That's amazing,
Marla said. Hopkins, his hand still around her waist, smiled at her.
I don't put limits on myself.
Do you mean to tell me old age doesn't affect you? Dugan asked.
I'm in a battle against aging.
Marla patted his back. You seem to be winning.
I am indeed.
Roger Stern stepped up to them.
Hey, Marla, did you catch my finish?
Marla placed her hand lightly on Stern's bare shoulder.
Sorry, Roger, I missed it. I was talking to Dr. Hopkins. Did you know he won?
Stern eyed the doctor.
You beat the Morrison boy?
Hopkins nodded.
Felt pretty good today.
You ran like a horse on fire. Congratulations.
Stern stuck out his hand and the doctor shook it.
Guess it's true. Some old dogs improve with age.
Dugan bit his tongue. If Stern let out another nonsensical saying, he might slap him. And how much longer was Marla going to rest her hand on Stern's arm? Dugan took a deep breath to collect himself. He needed to let go of these petty irritations.
So, tell me, Doc, how'd you get so fast lately? Are you on something?
Dugan.
Marla dropped her hand from Stern's shoulder.
How could you ask that?
I meant vitamins or some nutritional concoction. Dugan couldn't help smiling. His question had made her unhand Fabio. Hopkins cleared his throat.
Good question. I've always been a health-conscious person. Good diet, plenty of vitamins, early to bed, early to rise. But lately I've been on a new program.
What kind of program?
Dugan asked.
It's incredibly unique. I can't say much right now, but in time the world will know. Anyway, I need to run a couple cool-down miles. You want to join me, Roger?
Sure,
Stern said.
Why not? Can't let grass grow under a rolling stone.
Stern and Hopkins headed toward the bridge at an easy gait. Dugan glanced at Marla. She watched them depart. probably focusing on Stern's butt.
Did you hear what he said?
Marla asked.
In time, the world will know.
I heard him.
I bet he's writing a book on the secret of staying fit in your golden years.
I'm sure that's it. He'll probably end up with his own show on the Oprah Network.
Marla glared at him, eyes narrowing.
He didn't look like he was hyped up on drugs to me.
Dugan had to admit she was right. Hopkins appeared healthier than ever, clear-minded, and a lot younger than 65, but still 2 minutes faster?
You don't realize how fast 1735 is for a guy his age.
Maybe you don't realize how determined and dedicated that man is. Add to that his knowledge of the human body. I bet he doesn't touch red meat or sweets or anything with caffeine.
Maybe, but I doubt it. Dugan peered over his shoulder at one of the park's food stands.
Want a hamburger, donut, and coffee? I'll buy.
Marla smiled sheepishly.
Yeah, I'm starved.
Marla gulped down her last bite of hamburger and swigged her coffee. That hit the spot. She still couldn't get over Dr. Hopkins' amazing race. To Marla, he definitely didn't look 65, maybe 45. She and Dugan decided to stroll around the park and chat with the locals. At the docks, they checked out the small crowd walking the decks of the Elizabeth II, a replica of an old English merchant vessel. In the distance, they heard the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, slapping hot iron at the first English settlement site. Dugan wanted to walk in that direction. Marla guessed Dugan still had a crush on her. Ever since grade school, he'd often sneaked a peek at her with those lovelorn green eyes. Whenever she'd meet his gaze, he'd quickly look away. Back in high school, he had few friends, but she and Gabriel always liked him. She guessed his loyalty to Gabriel kept him from ever letting his feelings be known. Now that she was 34 years old and widowed, she wondered if she could fall in love with him. Physically, she preferred someone like Roger Stern. But there was something about Dugan, an indefinable quality. They entered the settlement site to the sound of greensleeves being played on the lute and the smell of a wood fire. An older man sat on a stool under a magnolia tree and plucked the instrument. He wore loose trousers that came to mid-calf and a linen coat belted at the waist with a cord. A group of tourists gathered before the blacksmith shop to watch the muscular man stoke the fire and pound red-hot irons into useful implements.
See that young couple standing by the lute player?
Marla asked. Dugan shifted his attention from the blacksmith to the couple.
What about them?
The girl's talking about their upcoming wedding. She wants to have it someplace on the Outer Banks. The Whalehead Club in Corolla, or here in Manteo amid the Elizabethan gardens.
You can read lips?
Marla nodded.
I have a deaf cousin, Audra Stevens.
I remember Audra.
We hung out a lot when we were kids. Her skill fascinated me. She taught me the basics, mouth shapes, and facial expressions. I'd stare at myself in the mirror and say the alphabet or sing songs. Got pretty good at it.
Dugan raised his eyebrows.
Do you have any other hidden talents I don't know about?
Marla grinned.
Plenty.
Above the music and crowd noise, Marla heard the public address system in the distance calling the 5K participants to gather for the awards ceremony. Dugan wanted to head back in that direction. He'd check with the race officials to make sure everything went smoothly, and then they would head out in the cruiser to take a loop around town before heading back to the office to catch up on some paperwork. As they approached the large group of runners crowding the amphitheater stage near the finish line, Dr. Hopkins mounted the few steps to receive his trophy. The crowd cheered and applauded loudly. Hopkins held up his hand and took the microphone from the race director.
Well, thank you, fellow runners, and all you who came out to support us today. I know you clapped extra enthusiastically because this first-place trophy was handed to a guy who's been around the block a few more times than most of you.
Another round of applause rippled through the crowd.
That good advice is something a man gives when he's too old to set a bad example. I hope I'm not that old, but I would like to give you some advice. Don't let your age put limitations on your life. I'm running faster now than I did 20 years ago. Why? because I refuse to let age dictate the level of my aspirations.
Marla scanned the audience and noticed how intently they listened. Most understood his victory today was quite spectacular. He earned their attention.
Do you want to live to be 100? How about this? Would you like to run 6 miles on your 100th birthday? I plan on it. Believe me, it's possible. I know what I'm talking about. But it will never happen if you give up the fight. I'm talking about battling against the ravages of age. Eat healthy. Exercise daily. Keep your mind agile. It's got to be more than some 5-step program you follow. To make it stick, it has to become your lifestyle. I've done a lot of research over the years in the causes of aging and age-related diseases. Let me just say that recently, I've made great strides.
Today's race proves that.
Roger Stern hollered. He was standing about 10 feet in front of Marla, much taller than the people who surrounded him. Marla couldn't help but admire his wide shoulders.
Thanks, Roger.
Dr. Hopkins said.
It's true. I've made great strides physically and medically. Soon you'll find out more about what I've learned. For now, though, I encourage all of you to run the race. Fight the battle. Don't let age limit your life.
The crowd exploded with applause again as the doctor descended the stage. Dugan shook his head. Marla didn't understand why he was so skeptical. Perhaps years of law enforcement had jaded him, caused him to assume the worst about people. Would that happen to her eventually?
Let's get out of here. I've heard enough of this boy.
Dugan said.
It makes sense to me. Fitness can't be a chore. It has to be part of your lifestyle.
Mark my words, Marla. Hopkins won't live much longer if he's experimenting with performance-enhancing drugs. A 65-year-old body can only take so much.
The drive from Manteo to Rodanthe took about a half an hour. Miles and miles of sand dunes and water. Marla loved this section of the Outer Banks with its unspoiled beaches and raw beauty. By late afternoon, though, she struggled to keep her eyes open. Her first 5 days on the job after months of training was exciting but exhausting. She looked forward to getting home, spending time with Gabe, and hitting the sack early. She turned right off Route 12 onto Island Pine Drive and then drove a couple hundred yards down a narrow asphalt road lined with tall pines and live oaks. Her blue beach house was on the right. Home sweet home. They had moved there 6 months ago from Buxton, where she used to work at the bookstore in town. Rodanthe seemed to be the perfect place for Gabe and her, halfway between her good friends in Buxton and her new job in Manteo. Her 3-bedroom home sat on pilings, 8x8 posts between a patch of woods on the right and a rental house on the left. The yard on both sides of the wide cement driveway consisted mostly of sea oats. It really didn't need much maintenance. From her front deck in the morning, she could look to the left and see the sun rising over the Atlantic Ocean, or in the evening to the right, she could view a beautiful sunset over the Pamlico Sound. Their first few months in Rodanthe felt precarious, especially when the thunderstorms blew in off the ocean. But the spectacular sunrises and sunsets, and the unbelievable beauty of the raw surroundings, more than made up for the perilous sensation of living on the edge of nature's wrath. Gabe and his best friend Ryan sat on the top step waiting for her. Ryan's mom, Shelley Bottoms, watched Gabe after school every day for an hour until Marla got home, and all day on Saturdays when Marla worked. The Bottoms lived only 2 doors down. Marla insisted on paying her, but she refused to accept any money. Our sons hang out 24/7 anyway, Shelley always said. It was true. The boys were inseparable. 2 rough-and-tumble first-graders who delighted in the outdoors, video games, and boyhood shenanigans. Gabe stood up, brown eyes wide, lips tight, that I'm about to ask an important question look on his face. His black hair was disheveled and left sneaker untied.
Mom, could I stay at Ryan's house tonight? Please, 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 please.
What? Marla's heart sank. She had hoped to spend some quality time with him that evening, but then again she was dead tired. Ryan stood up. Blond and wiry, he smiled, revealing a gap in his front teeth.
My mom rented the Transformer movies for us. We wanted to stay up and watch all of them. Yeah, Mom, all 3 of them.
But don't you miss me? Gabe rushed down the steps and wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing the side of his face against her stomach.
Yeah, I miss you, but we'll have time tomorrow.
He raised his head, his eyes like big brown marbles. Tomorrow was Sunday. They could go out to breakfast and then to church. Besides, how could she compete with the Transformer movies?
Okay, if you really and truly miss me, you can stay at Ryan's.
He nodded.
Really and truly.
But we're going to eat dinner together. Marla peered up at Ryan.
Tell your mom Gabe will be over in about an hour.
Ryan leaped and shouted,
All right, Optimus, prime time tonight.
Marla cooked up hamburgers and macaroni and cheese for dinner. Gabe gobbled his food, but Marla made him sit still and tell her all about his day before she would give him his favorite dessert, a Klondike bar. After polishing off his ice cream, Gabe asked,
Did you arrest any criminals today?
No, but we did drive the sheriff's car through Manteo leading a 5K race. Oh, and we caught a couple teenage boys lighting firecrackers.
Did you arrest them?
No, just gave them a warning. They were tourist kids. Gabe tilted his head.
You think you'll ever catch a murderer?
Maybe. But I'm in no hurry to do that, Marla thought.
That would be cool.
It didn't take long to gather up the few necessities for Gabe's overnighter, an extra pair of underwear, pajamas, a toothbrush. Marla walked him down the street to Ryan's house, not more than 50 yards away. Ryan opened the door as they approached the front porch. Gabe charged up the steps and into the house, the door shut with a loud thud behind him.
Goodbye, sport,
she said to a walnut door with frosted glass. As she walked back home, she realized this was the beginning of a long letting-go process. She wanted to cry, but held back the tears. She needed a hot bath and a good night's sleep.